right, welcome to another edition of the Teflon Tales. With me today, I have a guest from India, Anupam Arunachalam. Welcome, Anupam.
Hi, Ashwin. How are you?
Good to meet you. And interestingly, we were just discussing whether Anupam and I have ever met or not. We still haven't figured that one out. The way we got connected is Anupam is a phenomenal book author and illustrator, and my mom is a phenomenal book writer as well. So they are in close collaboration, and Anupam's mom and my mom are close buddies as well. So that's how we connected. Uh, so Anupam, I want to start with your journey in your, let's say, late teens and come to a point in your life and then pose the question to you, which is uh, growing up in India, you have a typical question, right? As you heard, do you want to become a doctor? Or do you want to become an engineer, right? And then there's everything else. Um, and clearly, you were following a certain path, right? Which took you down to one of the most prestigious engineering institutions, Manipal Institute of Technology, and you finished your engineering. And then what happened?
Um, it was what happened while I was finishing my engineering, which was that I had an internship with a software hardware company in Manipal called Manipal.net, which is this very interesting company because they do a lot of very cutting edge technical work
Hmm.
in Manipal itself, which
Okay.
is like Manipal is a very small college town in the middle of nowhere in Karnataka,
Mhm.
and in having like a hardcore tech company over there is something of like an anomaly.
Mhm.
But anyway, the person who set it up, his uh, he and all his brothers studied in the US. They worked in large tech companies in the US and then came back to Manipal and set up that company.
Mhm.
Uh, but I was doing an internship there, and it was a great internship. But I that's where I realized that I'm not feeling it. Like I liked my line of
Mhm.
what I was being trained in, but somehow I didn't feel that passion that I saw the people around me feeling. So I realized that maybe this isn't what I'm meant for. Maybe, and there'd always been this burning desire at the back of my mind to do something with specifically comics because I'd been in my late teens or in my mid-teens, I'd been reintroduced to comics, and I'd really gotten into it. And I decided to drop everything and start writing and drawing comics back then.
Okay, so let's hit pause over there. So any teenager will tell you, right? I mean, I wanted to start a rock band. Ask my mother, right? uh, you're talking about comics. People want to be a painter and a sportsman and cricket, right? Everybody wants to be a cricketer. Uh,
Right.
so, but very few people will actually follow through, right? Either because you're your own worst self-critic,
Hmm.
or because it's your family, right? I mean, all said and done, they put in their effort behind you and making sure that you get schooled and
Yeah.
college and all that, and society at large, right? People, and as Brené Brown says, hey, there are lots of people in the spectator stand making judgment calls on what your life should or shouldn't be. So, how have you navigated through that circle of self-critic, familial pressure, and then the society's view?
Well, I mean, part of it is just being naive about a lot of things. But uh, of course, when it comes to people who are around me, my parents, friends, like they did share some, I mean, they did have some misgivings, not like major ones, and they did share those with me. But by and large, they were very, very supportive. And also, like, um, I think I'm about like appropriately critical of myself. I'm not too critical. I'm not one of those, people who are self-flagellating, but I'm also not very optimistic about my like I don't think I'm overly optimistic about what I'm capable of or whatever, but the combination of things were actually perfect for me that when I decided to do this, I did not have to look back, and I didn't end up looking back.
So that's actually an interesting takeaway for some of the people listening and viewing is keeping not reaching for the stars, right, and keeping that almost like a an immediate next step and looking and moving forward. So but I kind of look at it, I do this for all my guests, right? So and given that you're an author and illustrator combo, is understanding how, and again this goes back to the Teflon analogy, which is how do you get hot and yet stay detached and be flexible and balanced. So in that it's a very unique combination of having somebody who can both illustrate as well as write. So how do you navigate through those two lives, if you will, right? And has one really helped you fuel the other, or are they kind of it's a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Right. So when I started doing this, I had very little experience in either. But of course, it's easier to be, found out for a fraud when you're an illustrator than a writer, because I mean, it's harder to point out that hey, this person can't write. So I started writing first. But eventually, I was interested in comics. I started writing comics, and I didn't come out hot. I'm not one of those people who has, who takes, or at least I didn't used to be the kind of person who takes a lot of initiative.
Mhm.
So for a while, it was, I like talking about getting hot, like I wasn't there yet.
Mhm.
But eventually, I started writing comics, and on the side, I was drawing. And
Mhm.
so I think it took me a good 4 5 years to
Mhm.
get my illustration career kickstarted. And after that, it's been a slightly weird journey because some people know me as an illustrator, some people know me as a writer, and
Yeah.
whoever got to know me as whichever of these has kind of like stuck to that very rigidly in the sense that they don't consider me the other thing. Like, at
Yeah.
least that was the case for a long time. Of course, there are notable exceptions to this, but so both of my kind of careers were going in parallel and not intersecting for a long time. But now
Mhm.
I think I've reached a level of proficiency with both of them where I'm getting more of a sense of how they dovetail, and from um, about what you said about how they feed into each other, I'm definitely getting a lot more of a sense of that. I'm taking a lot more lessons from illustration,
Mhm.
applying it, like they're more than lessons, they're sort of like meta lessons, right? And applying it to writing and vice versa. And yeah, it's been quite interesting. And a lot of the stuff I do, drawing and illustrating books and drawing and writing comics, they use both the skills, so they're not that separate anymore.
Yeah, so going back, and again, you mentioned these two personas, right? That for the longest time were kind of standalone, if you will.
Mhm.
Is and you mentioned a time frame of 4 to 5 years. So in that period, right, in that gestation period, if you will, where you're still trying to figure out who you are and what you want to be, what sort of skill set, what sort of attitude did you bring into when you woke up every single day, right? There had to be something that fuel that kept you going, and that gave you direction as well as allowed you to change tactics.
Right. Um, yeah, that's a slightly hard one to answer. I think it was mostly what I'm still kind of like excited by or driven by, which
Mm,
is like coming up with good stories, good work um, in whatever form that may be, and that's almost the only thing that motivates me, in
mm,
the sense that I'm not I'm not saying I wasn't looking for external validation. I
mm,
definitely was,
mm,
but somehow that wasn't. I don't think that was the primary motivating force in any case. So yeah, still that same thing. And it's not only the source for motivation, it's also a source of great disappointment whenever, something does not work out, and like I reach a roadblock in my creative journey, or with any project, any work. Yeah.
So one of the things, and I was looking at the reviews that your latest book, The Young Pandavas, has got on Amazon, right? And the one thing that was consistent about it, right, is the audience that you are reaching out to, right, which is really the young kids, right, whatever
Right.
ages, let's say 5 to 10,
Right.
and the parents who, in most cases, at least the reviews, most of the reviews were parents who were reading the
Yeah.
book out to the kids, and they were stunned by the way it was, both the parents and the kids. I mean, obviously the kids' reaction is the primary motivator, but even the mother or the father actually reading it were quite taken in by the prose, by the language. So how do you connect with your audience, and how do you, I mean, since you're not face to face, like we're seeing each other over here, and if I say something stupid, yeah, I'll see see that in your face. So as a writer and illustrator, where your target audience is predominantly these young kids, how do you get your feedback?
So I've been lucky enough to interact with kids quite directly at festivals, and in many cases when I've been involved in teaching at workshops in schools, or when you're a writer with one of the big publishers here, they send you off to, like, at least in the pre-COVID era,
Yeah.
we went to different schools and we visited uh, a lot of kids and kind of had that interaction with them. So I think I've had that sort of limited, like it's been a sandbox kind of interaction. One can't go into the, kid's house and see how they're reacting, which is, like, in a way a pity, right? But
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can see how they interact, or how they react to different things that you're saying, stories you might be telling, questions you might be asking in at these venues. So yeah, that's my limited interaction. I have written and drawn for adults as well, where
Mhm.
of course the feedback is more immediate,
More
and
direct. Yeah.
uh, yeah.
So you mentioned something earlier on, just going back to that internship at the moneypal.net, and that, and you said, and again I go back to this because lots of times you, uh, I I mean you in general terms, right, is you're influenced by people around you, right?
Hmm.
And what gave you the courage to say, hey, this isn't it for me? Looking at how your fellow interns were taking in, and you were not. And so that's the first part of it. The second part of the question is, lots of times people have to try out a few things before they figure out, hey, this is my passion, right? So how did you kind of fast track through both those? One is saying, hey, I don't need to like force myself to be inspired when I'm not during this internship, and number two is, okay, how did you discover this is it early on?
So I think both of those kind of go towards one answer, which is I was a pretty weird kid, uh, which is because when I was since I was very young, I've been very interested in stories, and in a very specific kind of, like, the science fiction, fantasy, like that genre that I, I mean, it was a genre where I was the only one I knew who was interested in it, and
Mhm.
somehow that didn't, like, put me off it. Like, I was very into it from the beginning, and I didn't know I was weird, or that I was lonely in doing this or anything like that. That's something I've gathered later on.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, so I've always been into stories, reading, telling stories, and stuff like that. And I was always, like, I don't know what my relationship with conforming uh, with the people around me was, because I guess, like, when you are an electronics engineer as, like, an Indian kid, you have conformed to a certain
Yeah, yeah.
extent. But yeah, I don't think that was a huge concern for me when I was deciding all this. So when it was something that had always been at the back of my mind,
Yeah.
and I was, at that age, like it's young enough, but also old enough to kind of make a big change in life, which is like at 21, I kind of decided to take the plunge. Yeah, it was a very naive decision. I mean, I wouldn't like to make it look like some kind of great epiphany that I had, but
Right.
it was a very strong decision. I couldn't go back, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is the part that a majority of people don't have, that right, which is you put in enough effort early on to realize that this is what it is, so therefore you got to do it. So kudos to you for that. The one other thing I was looking at, again researching you before today's show, is World Book Fair 2020 in New Delhi, right? And
Hmm.
Hatchet India, which is the publisher, they've been interviewed over there, and you were in very august company. They were talking about four authors: Vishwanathan Anand, Enid Blyton, J.K. Rowling, and then Anupam. Right? So while you may or may not agree whether you've arrived or not, right? As far as I'm concerned, uh, that is success, right? To be able to be called out in that sort of. But clearly, talking to you right now, you have many more milestones to achieve. So if I were to kind of push this needle forward and say, hey, let's say in 20 years from now, what is success and fulfillment mean to you?
That's right. So that uh, item in the news, like being sort of named in a list with these people, it's much more of an aberration than anything else. But yeah, yeah, glad to be there, of course. In 20 years, so this is something I do think about, but I think my actual like horizon of thinking about these things is very close by. Like I don't like naturally think that far ahead, except in like terms of just fantasizing. But I think the answer that I've slowly sort of come up with for a 20-year time frame is that it would be nice to be able to see a mark, making a mark on culture in some way. And I mean, I think for any storyteller, any like creative person, that would be sort of the ultimate goal. But I mean, again, like I don't think that is currently what is driving me today, what is, like fueling my ambition or anything like that. But yeah, I think like intellectually it makes sense that that would be a good long term goal. Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody, yeah, it's like, hey, what impact did you have? What positive impact did you have? Right. So, one final question.
Right.
Looking back, right? Uh, if there was one thing that you may have done differently, right? And the answer could be, hey, there's nothing, right? Which is perfectly okay. But if there's one thing that you could look back and say, hey, maybe I could have done this sooner, I could have changed that. Is there something that you would, if you had a way back time machine, what would you change?
That's right. Hmm. So I think in general, I'm like, and this is still like my major flaw, which is that I'm maybe too chill a person. Like I think one of it's a very standard sort of advice, right? Like I would have liked to fail faster and just learn faster. So
Mm,
I would have loved to take more initiative than I took,
mm,
and like just sort of uh, uh, just to have understood a lot of things a lot faster by going out there, making more of my stuff public, talking to the people that I want to talk to. Which is like the good thing about that is like that's still an issue I have, and I could fix it like right now.
yeah.
So so yeah, I think that's the main thing.
Cool. So, okay, so I lied. One final question, right? So, if you had any words of advice to uh, kids, I mean, like you said, 21 was probably too late for you. So, let's say kids are still trying to figure out, right, what is it that they are passionate about. And um, would you give them the same advice that you just gave yourself early on, which is try many things and push boundaries? Are there other things that you would, again, it's different now, right, with all the digital distractions and everything else going on over here. So any words of advice to that group, so let's say between 15 and 20-year-olds, as to how they can chart the path, and looking at you in the eye and seeing that you've hit that point where your passion and purpose and profit have intersected? What
Hmm,
can they do to get discover that at that age?
right. So I think that there are people of all stripes. So I was a certain kind of person who lacked initiative, who might have been a little shy, but there are people of the other sort as well who don't lack any initiative, whose problem might be the reverse, which is that they might get up in people's faces too often. So
Yeah.
I think the main thing is just know yourself, which you do even as like a 21-year-old. You do know who you are, and you kind of have to compensate for the things that your inherent personality doesn't allow you to do. So if you do feel that you're too shy, I would say that kind of maybe go a little bit out of your comfort zone. I would say go a little bit out of your comfort zone. Like, I think that's an important thing for anyone.
Yeah, no, that's truer words were never said, right? Because, like you said, if you're the aggressive sort, your comfort zone is to not be an aggressor, and if you're the shy
Right.
sort, it's like, hey, you know what? It's okay to be in your face a few times,
Right.
right? So
Yeah. And I don't think you can go too far out of that, the barriers of your personality, but I think you can go a little further than feels comfortable so that you don't have regrets later. Yeah.
right, I think that is so true, right? That regrets later, what if, right? Hey,
Right.
it's like, I think Michael Jordan said it, right? You can't miss a shot that you've never tried.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's that,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Again, Anubhav, I know it's early for you, so thanks for waking up and taking the time, and hopefully the viewers and listeners have taken a thing or two that they can imbibe in their own lives.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's been great talking to you. And thanks a lot.
Thanks, Anupam.